Hello, my name is Professor Charles Mwewa. I am the author of this biggest and most comprehensive book in terms of size and content for Zambia. It's called Zambia Struggles of My People. In the last segment, I pinpointed the fact that at independence, that's when Zambia started to learn Western style governance. Now, the importance of that statement or that illustration is the fact that when we got independence in Africa, 20 years, 30 years, or even 40 years after the fact, many Europeans and Americans started to laugh at us. They started to laugh at Africans, thinking that Africans were incapable of governing themselves. And honestly speaking, Africans have been a little bit very silent on that. I have yet to read poignant discussions on that, because remember, everything that has happened to Africa is what was said about Africa. Africa is not what has been said about it, but it becomes what is said about it. You take a sample from anywhere, a theory or a theorem, and you're going to find that Africa was not poor. It is one of the richest continents on earth. But immediately people started to say Africans are poor, then Africans start to showcase themselves as poor. Africa doesn't have many wars. Africa has over 50 countries. Sometimes there's 8 or 10 countries at war, and the entire world is going to say Africa is at war. Remember, if in North America there is war, North America is where I live. There are only 3 countries in North America. If Mexico went to war, for example, would say a third of North America is at war. We are not going to say the entire North America is at war, even if only one country goes to war. But in Africa, there have been this tendency to brutalizing its history and story by simply attaching everything negative to it. One president makes a coup, or one leader makes a coup in Africa, the headlines which will reach us in the West will be like, there is coup in Africa. No, they should say, one of the countries in Africa has had a coup, because most of those 50 plus countries in Africa are sovereign states. It's the same with history. Our history in Africa has been written from one side, usually the West-centric side. It is like everything that happens in one place in Africa has happened to every place in Africa, even if that event happened only to a small group of people. Nevertheless, having said that, yes, indeed, that's how we have our history bequeathed to us, but we must make effort to re-educate the world about Africa. And we start with Zambia. In Zambia, political leadership, the Western style, was not available at independence. Kaunda, Kapwepwe, Mwanga, all these leaders, first leaders of Zambia, they did not know Western style leadership. Kaunda had gone with some of his friends to adopt the constitution, some other national instruments in Lancaster House in England. Those were just visits. They didn't even give them an opportunity to investigate Western governance. They just went there to discuss the elements of independence, what to include, what not to include. They came back. They were visitors. I have said many times, I didn't know what the West was when I was visiting the West as a visitor, and I went back to Africa until I lived in the West for many years. Now I understand the framework, the phraseology relative to Western living, the modus operandi of governance, and the psychological aspect, and even the philosophies of Westernism. So Kaunda couldn't say that he knew governance. They were doing it at gunpoint. But Africans knew leadership. That's the most important thing. We talked about Lewanika, how he knew how to govern without reading a Western written book. He knew how to work hard, how to listen, how to hear the people say. He got advisors who could advise and correct him. All these were not written by Westerners, as we think. So if we say some African countries have failed leadership-wise, were wrong, it's just because probably they had inherited attitudes that were anti-Africa, such as corruption. Corruption is anti-Africa. In every kingdom I have studied, I've even written about some kingdoms in Africa, novels even demonstrating how their life would have been. Corruption was always treated like cancer in the society. People could leave their stuff outside and go for a long time. No one would steal. Corruption was birthed in Africa by colonialism. And we'll have some times to talk about that. But for now, it's important to put it in framework that Western-style leadership was absent in Zambia at independence. We started learning leadership, the Western style, in 1964. So Zambia is quite very young in learning the leadership style of the West. Western countries must be fair when they judge. They must be fair when they attribute the governance in Africa and the governance in the West. The West has had over 500 years of Western-style governance. Africa has had less than 70 years. So that differentiation must be borne in mind. And most importantly, we must also understand that leadership in Africa was organic. Africans knew how to govern swaths of kingdom dwellers, not only individuals. They knew how to govern people, and by extension, they knew and they know, especially Africans who are found in Zambia, the present-day Zambia, they knew how to govern themselves. As we study Zambian past leaders who have ingloriously been left out in important books of history, we have elevated political leadership that was formed at 1964 and forgotten about our fathers and mothers that governed that land very democratically, so to speak, and very prosperously pre-1964. I will make effort to discuss some of those people in other segments that follow. Thank you.